Good evening, everyone. So, today we will be discussing with paper 1 analysis of PSIR optional, political science and international relations optional. I will discuss in detail about not only the answer of the question, but I will also be discussing with you about the approach of the question, because questions are more or less on the lines of general studies only, fairly direct. They have not twisted the question. But these questions require extensive practice on your part. Practice in the sense that questions are not difficult, but writing the answer in 150 words, it becomes an extremely challenging task for a student. That is why I keep on reiterating to students that you need to have very fast handwriting in order to complete your paper. तो हम लोग यहाँ पर कोशिश करेंगे, we will not be only discussing about the answer of the question, but we will also be discussing about the approach of the question. I also found out that some part of the questions could have easily been dealt by using flowcharts and diagrams. There was no need to write those part of the question, write those part of the answer. तो हम लोग उन सारी चीज़ों के बारे में डिस्कशन करेंगे, and we will also be discussing about how trend has been shifting, how trend has shifted. And in the last couple of years, if you will look at the trend, you will realize one thing in political science and international relations paper is that earlier there used to be overwhelming emphasis on Western political thought. Now they are asking very less number of questions from Western political thought. Overwhelming emphasis of the question is not on Western political thought, rather touching all aspects of the syllabus. And hitherto untouched areas have also been asked by examiner in this paper. So let us begin with political theory part of the paper. If you will look at political theory part of the paper, you will realize that Western political thought has not been given tremendous amount of emphasis as used to be the trend earlier. In the last couple of years, they have started giving less weightage to Western political thought and Indian political thought. And rather than focusing upon one or two areas, they are trying to touch almost all the paper, almost all the aspects of syllabus. So they are touching upon those untouched areas which students will not do. For example, you will not be focusing upon many areas of Indian government and politics. You will not be focusing upon many areas of political theory. So in the last couple of years, in the last 3, 4, 5 years, I have seen that political theory, first topic, section A, political science, first topic, political theory. This topic has been regularly occurring in your paper, and every year 2-3 questions they keep on asking from the single topic, which is very easy to complete. Not only easy to complete, it is easy to prepare. It's relatively a smaller topic as compared to Western political thought and Indian political thought. So political theory section has been given a lot of emphasis in recent years. So as you can see here, the 3 questions directly have been asked from political theory, and those questions were direct question. Like they have talked about Credo of relevance of David Easton. They have also talked about decline of political theory. Now these topics are very general topic. One more thing which you can analyze from here is that in this entire paper, if a student could have only gone through the syllabus and have completed the topics from the syllabus itself from any one good source, you could have been easily able to solve entire paper. So there was nothing special about this paper. There was no need to go through a number of portions. I tell you that any one source would have sufficed. Any one source. मतलब मैं आपसे ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि आपको कोई एक सोर्स A पढ़ना है या B पढ़ना है. Any one source could have sufficed. कोई भी अगर आपने एक सोर्स फॉलो किया होगा, कोई भी क्लास अगर आपने फॉलो किया हुआ होगा, कोई भी इग्नू जैसी एक बुकलेट अगर आपने फॉलो की हुई होगी, पूरा का पूरा पेपर वहां से आया है. इनफैक्ट इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स में तो मैं देख रहा हूं कि उन्होंने पूरा का पूरा पेपर सिलेबस के हेडिंग से उन्होंने क्वेश्चन पूछे हैं. Even in political theory and even in political theory part, they have asked very generic question. They have not emphasized upon tough questions. They have not paraphrased the question in such a manner that it will be difficult for you to understand. ऐसा कोई क्वेश्चन उन्होंने नहीं पूछा है. उन्होंने आसान क्वेश्चन पूछे हैं और इसीलिए यहां पर यह कहना गलत होगा कि मैंने पढ़ाया है और वहां से आया है. इस बार का पेपर का ट्रेंड ऐसा है कि इट्स नॉट ओनली ट्रू अबाउट ओनली पॉलिटिकल साइंस. अगर आप पूरा का पूरा जनरल स्टडीज का भी पेपर देखिए और दूसरे ऑप्शनल के लोगों से भी मैंने बात किया, सो आई रियलाइज वन थिंग कि उन्होंने सारे के सारे ऑप्शनल में और जनरल स्टडीज में ऐसे क्वेश्चन पूछे हैं विच यू कैन इजीली आंसर just by sticking to the syllabus. So these are the analysis part of the syllabus, जिसमें आपको एक बात समझ में आ रही होगी कि किसी भी एक टॉपिक पर उनका ओवरवेलमिंग एम्फेसिस नहीं है और लगभग सारे ही टॉपिक को उन्होंने अपनी तरफ से टच करने की कोशिश की है. लेकिन it was nonetheless it was a lengthy paper in the sense that completing paper on time will be a challenging task for you, point number 1. Second, writing answers of question in 150 words will again remain a challenging task for you. And one thing I can also vouch for is that a couple of questions are common in both general studies and political science paper, especially in Indian government and politics part, जहां पर उन्होंने क्वेश्चन को हल्का सा ट्विस्ट किया हुआ है. क्वेश्चन में 150 वर्ड्स में लिखना विल बी अ चैलेंजिंग टास्क. कोई भी क्वेश्चन अगर वो 10 मार्कर है, इट्स अ डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चन as compared to 15 marker and 20 marker questions. 10 markers are always difficult. So paper wise analysis is paper appears easier compared to last year. Topics were directly asked from the syllabus and a good score can be obtained. An Indian government and politics part was direct and easy to understand. Any one source would have sufficed and mostly static content was present which is easy to handle. लेकिन आपको एक बात ध्यान रखना है कि स्टैटिक कंटेंट के साथ एक चैलेंज ये होता है कि आपको उसको रेलेवेंट बनाना है बाय गिविंग कंटेम्पररी एग्जांपल. यहीं पर मोस्ट ऑफ द स्टूडेंट्स फॉल्टर. तो पेपर में एक जनरल ट्रेंड ये देखने में आया है कि उनका बहुत ज्यादा इंफोसिस इज नॉट ऑन बुक्स. कोई भी एक सोर्स विल सफाइस. कोई भी एक सोर्स अगर आप पढ़ते हैं वहां से पूरे के पूरे क्वेश्चन उन्होंने पूछे हुए हैं. एंड दिस इज द क्वेश्चन पेपर. अब यहां एज यू कैन सी हियर दैट 3 टाइप्स ऑफ क्वेश्चन, 10 मार्कर, 15 मार्कर एंड 20 मार्कर हैव बीन आस्क्ड. यहां पर कुछ जगहों पर आप फंस सकते हैं, जैसे कि दिस वन, थर्ड क्वेश्चन. ये तीसरा क्वेश्चन ऐसा है कि तीसरे क्वेश्चन के लिए आपको थोड़ा सा स्पेसिफिक नॉलेज होना चाहिए. बाकी के क्वेश्चन कैन इजीली बी टैकल्ड. लाइक यहां पर एक क्वेश्चन है, Fascism displays an ambivalent stance towards parliamentary democracy. Explain. Second, affirmative action policies draw as much strong criticism as strong support. Analyze this statement in the context of equality. And third, Eurocentrism is the target and the motive force of the postcolonial political theory discuss. केवल ये क्वेश्चन ऐसा है, लेकिन मेरा मानना है कि आपके पास पेपर में एम्पल अमाउंट ऑफ स्पेस है कि आपको अगर एक क्वेश्चन नहीं करना है तो उस क्वेश्चन को छोड़ के आप किसी और क्वेश्चन को देख सकते हैं. आपके पास स्पेस दिया है उन्होंने. इनफैक्ट आई एडवाइज्ड अ कपल ऑफ स्टूडेंट कि अगर तुम्हें स्कॉलर्स के कोट याद है या मान लिया तुमको प्लानिंग कमीशन का कुछ रिपोर्ट नीति आयोग का कुछ रिपोर्ट तुम्हें याद है, वाई के अलग का कुछ रिपोर्ट तुम्हें याद है, तो मैंने स्टूडेंट को ये भी एडवाइस किया था दैट यू कैन अटेम्प्ट 3 क्वेश्चंस फ्रॉम इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स एंड 2 क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम पॉलिटिकल थियरी पार्ट. लेकिन उन्होंने पेपर ऐसा पूछा हुआ है कि आप कहीं से भी 3 क्वेश्चन अटेम्प्ट कर सकते हैं. इट इज नॉट अ डिफिकल्ट टास्क. केवल ये थर्ड क्वेश्चन कुछ बच्चों के लिए ट्रिकी हो सकता है जिन्होंने इसके बारे में नहीं पढ़ा होगा. थर्ड क्वेश्चन केवल, क्योंकि नॉर्मली आइडियोलॉजी सेक्शन बच्चे छोड़कर जाते हैं पेपर में और फासिज्म लोगों ने हो सकता है कि ना पढ़ा हो. यह आसान टॉपिक है लेकिन हो सकता है कि आपने नहीं पढ़ा हो. अदरवाइज मैं देख रहा हूं कि कोई भी पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन ऐसा नहीं है कि जहां पर आपके लिए चैलेंजेस बहुत ज्यादा होंगे. दूसरा, मैंने इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स में जो ट्रेंड एनालाइज किया, इसमें बहुत सारे फैक्चुअल क्वेश्चन पूछे गए हैं, जैसे फंक्शंस ऑफ डिस्ट्रिक्ट प्लानिंग कमेटी। नाउ एनी वन सोर्स विल सफाइस, चाहे आप कोई भी सोर्स पढ़ेंगे, आप लक्ष्मीकांत पढ़ेंगे, कोचिंग का मटेरियल पढ़ेंगे, एनी वन कोर्स इज गोइंग टू सफाइस। Imprint of the British Constitution on the Indian Constitution, a very generic question. Satyagraha and Indian nationalism, a very generic question. National Commission for Minorities, कोई भी एक सोर्स विल सफाइस। 74th कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट, यहां से सीधे सीधे क्वेश्चन जीएस में भी है, यहां पर भी उन्होंने क्वेश्चन पूछा हुआ है 74th कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट से रिलेटेड। नीति आयोग से रिलेटेड उन्होंने क्वेश्चन पूछा है, अगेन नॉट अ वेरी चैलेंजिंग क्वेश्चन। एंड देन दे हैव आस्क्ड a question of statement of Granville Austin, that it is the cornerstone, Constitution of India is the cornerstone of the nation. In fact, it is the first line of his book. It is the name of the book also, Cornerstone of the Nation. And then they have asked a couple of questions which they have asked a number of times. For example, the question related to fundamental duties they have asked by UPSC a number of times. Question related to caste politics has been asked by UPSC a number of times. Coalition politics, again it has been asked a number of times. So questions were repeated also. The point is that if somebody has gone through previous year's question paper, apart from any one source, I feel that anyone could have easily cracked the code. Anyone could have easily scored good marks. In fact, I believe that above average marks इस पेपर में लाना किसी के लिए भी डिफिकल्ट नहीं होगा। तो इसीलिए मैं हमेशा दो सोर्स सजेस्ट करता हूं, दैट यू गो थ्रू एनी गुड क्लासरूम नोट्स, एनी गुड, इट्स नॉट अबाउट दिस कोचिंग और दैट कोचिंग, एनी वन गुड क्लासरूम नोट्स विच इज वेरी प्रिसाइज, विच इज रेलेवेंट and exam centric. The point is, it must be exam centric. It must not be loaded with knowledge. And second, if you have gone through the question papers of last 15 years, I believe that almost all the themes have been repeated. Everything. अगर आपने पिछले 2000 से लेकर के और अब तक के क्वेश्चन पेपर देखे हैं सिविल सर्विसेज के, जो मैं हमेशा स्टूडेंट से कहता हूं, that UPSC preparation sans question paper, it will leave you in vast and unknown ocean without mariner compass. You will be completely left confused. You will remain confused. इसीलिए मैं हमेशा ये कहता हूं that you go and have a look at the question paper. Question paper will give you tremendous amount of ideas what to study and what not to study. Up to what depth you can study a particular topic. बाउंड्री क्या होनी चाहिए उस टॉपिक की, दिस यू विल गेट टू नो अबाउट द क्वेश्चन पेपर. सो स्टूडेंट मस्ट गो थ्रू द क्वेश्चन पेपर्स, स्पेशली इन स्टैटिक एरियाज. अगर कोई भी स्टैटिक एरिया है और अगर आपने उसके प्रीवियस ईयर्स के क्वेश्चन को देखे हुए हैं, तो मेरा ऐसा पर्सनली मानना है कि क्वेश्चन को टैकल करना ऑप्शनल पेपर में इज नॉट अ डिफिकल्ट टास्क, क्योंकि ऑप्शनल पेपर में 80% क्वेश्चंस आर रिपीटेड. They merely paraphrase the question. वो rephrase और paraphrase करते हैं क्वेश्चन को. एक क्वेश्चन मान लिया उन्होंने 5 years बैक पूछा हुआ है, सेम क्वेश्चन को वो paraphrase करके आपसे 5 साल के बाद पूछ रहे हैं. आप पूछेंगे कि ऐसा क्यों होता है? इसके पीछे रीजन ये है कि अल्टीमेटली यू हैव टू आस्क क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम द सिलेबस ओनली. अगर आपको सिलेबस से रेलेवेंट क्वेश्चन पूछने हैं तो स्टैटिक एरियाज में वॉट एवर कैन बी आस्क्ड हैज ऑलरेडी बीन आस्क्ड. एकदम सिंपल सा फॉर्मूला है. स्टैटिक एरियाज में जो भी पूछा जा सकता है वो पूछा जा चुका है. अगर तुम्हें एग्जाम के लिए पेपर तैयार करना है तो डिफिकल्ट का कोई लिमिट नहीं है, लेकिन जो भी पेपर पूछा जा सकता है दैट हैज ऑलरेडी बीन आस्क्ड. सो इफ समबडी हैज गॉन थ्रू द क्वेश्चन पेपर of last 10, 15, 20 years, I believe that in optional paper you will find that almost 80% of the questions are repeated. At least themes will be repeated. कोई भी ऐसा क्वेश्चन नहीं है जैसे fascism वाला क्वेश्चन था, eurocentrism वाला क्वेश्चन था. Those questions have been asked by UPSC already. Many times they have asked those questions. Those questions have been asked many times by UPSC. माइनॉरिटीज कमीशन के बारे में उन्होंने क्वेश्चन पूछा हुआ है, ऑलरेडी दे हैव आस्क्ड सच क्वेश्चन. कॉर्नरस्टोन ऑफ द नेशन वाला स्टेटमेंट, 74th कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट, all these questions have been asked by UPSC in the past in some form or the other. आपका एक ही काम होता, इफ यू हैव गॉन थ्रू क्वेश्चन पेपर्स, प्रीवियस ईयर्स क्वेश्चन पेपर, तो आपको वो थीम पता हो जाता है और फिर एग्जाम में आपके लिए क्वेश्चन को सॉल्व करना डज नॉट रिमेन अ वेरी चैलेंजिंग टास्क, प्रोवाइडेड योर हैंडराइटिंग स्पीड इज गुड. नाउ लेट अस कम टू द एनालिसिस पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन. सो फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन विच दे हैव आस्क्ड, अब यहां पर एक बात हमेशा ध्यान रखिएगा, जो भी क्वेश्चन कंपल्सरी क्वेश्चन है, लाइक दिस फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन, अब यहां पर आपको पूरा प्रिसाइजली पता होना चाहिए और यहां पे जानबूझ करके उन्होंने आसान क्वेश्चन पूछे हैं. लास्ट ईयर दे आस्क्ड अ कपल ऑफ डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चंस, लाइक दे आस्क्ड वन revolution in permanence or cultural relativism. Now cultural relativism is not a difficult question, but for a political science student it was a challenging question, otherwise it was a very easy question. लेकिन यहां पर कैसा है, यहां पर उन्होंने सारे आसान क्वेश्चन आपसे पूछे हुए हैं. ये सारे के सारे टॉपिक आप किसी भी एक बेसिक मटेरियल में पाएंगे. इट्स नॉट अबाउट माय नोट्स और समवन एल्सेस नोट्स, एवरीवेयर यू विल फाइंड आंसर ऑफ दीज क्वेश्चंस. आप इसको प्रेजेंट कैसे करते हैं, सो लेट अस डिस्कस अबाउट नॉट ओनली द आंसर बट ऑल्सो डिस्कस अबाउट द अप्रोच ऑफ द पेपर, कि कौन सा पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन यू कुड हैव डिपिक्टेड थ्रू फ्लो चार्ट्स, यू कुड हैव डिपिक्टेड थ्रू डायग्राम्स, और कहां पर आपको आंसर लिखने की कहां पर आपको उस आंसर को केवल पैराग्राफ में लिखने की आवश्यकता है. ये केवल प्रैक्टिस के थ्रू आप जानेंगे. जैसे फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन, इट्स अ फेयरली डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन, दैट इज नॉर्मेटिव अप्रोच इन पॉलिटिकल साइंस. दैट्स इट. कमेंट ऑन द नॉर्मेटिव अप्रोच इन पॉलिटिकल साइंस. नाउ गिव अ ब्रीफ इंट्रो अबाउट नॉर्मेटिव अप्रोच. दैट नॉर्मेटिव अप्रोच, it focuses upon what ought to be. It focuses upon what needs to be done. It focuses upon what is moral and immoral, what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. So it is prescriptive in nature. Prescriptive in nature means what needs to be done, what ought to be done. It does not focus upon what is existing. It does not focus upon verifiable and observable phenomena. Its overwhelming focus is upon what ought to be. It is prescriptive in nature and it enters into the territory of good or bad. Now this is purely value judgment. This was one of the reasons that later on political science as a discipline, it got criticized as well. आगे उसके बारे में हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे. So you can have easily given an introduction related to normative approach, that it emphasizes upon what ought to be, what is right and what is wrong. It is prescriptive in nature. It is value laden. It does not focuses upon observable and verifiable phenomena. So its primary objective is to create an ideal state. And then you could have mentioned about scholars like Plato, Aristotle, and as I told you, their focus was on what ought to be, what needs to be done, rather than what is existing. And normative approach as a discipline, it makes value judgment about the things. So it is based upon armchair philosophy. It talks about value judgment of the things, that is what is right and what is wrong. It is not concerned about a scientific approach, like we will study only those aspects which are observable and verifiable, or it is not concerned about scientific tools and methodologies. So it is a value judgment. Now when you are making decision, when your focus is on value judgment, so that will make somebody happy, जिसके कल्चर के हिसाब से चीजें होंगी और जिसके हिसाब से चीजें नहीं होंगी, उसको वो इट विल नॉट मेक देम हैप्पी. जैसे फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर आप रॉल्स थियरी ऑफ जस्टिस देखते हैं, सो रॉल्स थियरी ऑफ जस्टिस has been criticized by scholars on this account only, because he wanted to create a grand theory of justice. आप में से जिन लोगों ने रॉल्स थियरी ऑफ जस्टिस पढ़ा होगा, they must be knowing about this fact that John Rawls wanted to create a grand theory of justice which will be applicable all the societies. He did not take into account the cultural aspect and how cultural aspects are going to influence somebody's notion of justice. उनके बारे में रॉल्स थियरी ऑफ जस्टिस ने कोई बात नहीं किया है. और इफ यू विल लुक एट प्लेटोज रिपब्लिक और रॉल्स थियरी ऑफ जस्टिस, or Marx's Communist Manifesto. So these books, they were prescriptive in nature. They focused upon what ought to be rather than what is existing. इनका overwhelming focus used to be upon what ought to be rather than what is existing. And then you mention about that challenges associated with normative approach briefly, क्योंकि यहाँ पर आपके लिए हमेशा एक बात याद रखना है, in examination it's a race against time. सिविल सर्विसेज एग्जाम में वो बहुत डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चन इसलिए नहीं पूछते हैं बिकॉज इट्स अ रेस अगेंस्ट टाइम. ऑलरेडी उन्होंने इतने नंबर ऑफ क्वेश्चन आपके सामने दे दिए हैं कि क्वेश्चन को अटेम्प्ट करना आपके लिए बहुत चैलेंजिंग टास्क हो जाएगा, पेपर कंप्लीट करना विद इन स्टिपुलेटेड टाइम पीरियड. इसीलिए आपको ये जानना जरूरी होगा कि कौन से पार्ट पे मुझे कितना इंफोसिस देना है. सो आई वुड एडवाइस यू that in 150 words question you need to finish your answer in 6.5 minutes. जब आपको 6.5 मिनट में उस क्वेश्चन का आंसर लिखना है, so you need to give a brief intro and then you directly come on to the question in any such topic like comment on the following. comment on the following, normative approach दिया हुआ है या उन्होंने कोई एक स्टेटमेंट आपके साथ दिया हुआ है, डिक्लाइन ऑफ पॉलिटिकल थियरी, इस टाइप के टॉपिक पर give a brief intro and then directly come on to the answer. In order to make your answer innovative, sometimes you can use flowcharts as well. Sometimes you can use diagrams as well, जो आपके आंसर को ज्यादा बेहतर बनाने की कोशिश करेगा, appealing बनाने की कोशिश करेगा in the eyes of examiner. And then you can briefly mention about the challenges associated with normative approach, like challenges which I have mentioned here, that the idea of right and wrong, it depends upon society. It is relative to one's culture. You also take into account the cultural aspects, the culture through which one is operating. For example, what may be correct for Western society may not be correct for Eastern societies, or what may be correct for Middle Eastern societies may not be correct for Indian subcontinent. So any kind of value judgment is not going to give you the complete picture. That is why I told you that challenges associated with normative approaches like perspectives of right and wrong changes as society changes. And then you provide a brief conclusion, and conclusion again, it should not be crossing 25 to 30 words. Any one question, any question in which they have asked, they have made you to write answer in 150 words, always remember that it's a race against time. So there is absolutely no point in overshooting word limit. आपको हमेशा जो भी बातें लिखनी है वो वर्ड लिमिट में लिखनी है. जैसे मैं एक चीज नोटिस कर रहा हूं सिविल सर्विसेज में कि जो भी वर्ड लिमिट को एडहियर करता है और सारा पेपर कंप्लीट करके आ जाता है, इनवेरिएबली मैंने देखा ऐसे बच्चों को, दे गेट एन इंटरव्यू कॉल. अगर उन्होंने रेलेवेंट चीजें लिखी है, पूरा पेपर कंप्लीट किया है टाइम पर, तो इनवेरिएबली मैंने देखा है दे गेट एन इंटरव्यू कॉल. इस क्वेश्चन में भी इट्स अ वेरी सिंपल अप्रोच that you fix that this is your introduction, this is your conclusion, and in body part you will mention about normative approach and provide some criticism related to challenges associated with the normative approach as well, and then a very brief and crisp conclusion. That's how you will finish your answer in 150 words. Now let us come on to another question. Another question is multicultural perspective on right. अब यहां पर एक क्वेश्चन ध्यान रखना, केवल ट्रेडिशनल अप्रोच अपनाने की जरूरत नहीं है. क्यों नहीं अपनाने की जरूरत है? यहां दो बातें हैं. पहली बात यहां पर यह है, ट्रेडिशनल अप्रोच में आपको करंट अफेयर्स से अगर आप लिंक कर देते हो किसी ऐसे टॉपिक को, सो दैट गिव्स एन आइडिया टू एग्जामिनर that you are a serious candidate and you can apply your knowledge to the societal problem. ये बताता है कि आपने concept को अच्छे तरीके से समझा है. So why has multicultural perspective on rights come into news? So recently it came into news because of the rights controversy with regard to providing LGBTQ rights. So multicultural perspective को तुम briefly mention करोगे कि multicultural perspective on rights क्या है. So it emphasizes upon the importance of recognizing and respecting different cultural values, beliefs, practices that exist within a society. For example, United States of America. So United States of America is multicultural society in which people belonging to different faith, people belonging to different cultural contexts, they are operating, they are living in United States of America. Now, Indian society has also started turning into a multicultural societies. But more than Indian society, it is, if you will look at United States of America, it's relatively a new nation. जहां पर आपको ये concept ज़्यादा applicable होता हुआ दिखेगा कि जहां पर people belonging to various faiths, various nationalities and various sexual orientation, they are living in those societies. That is why I have mentioned that multicultural perspective on rights emphasizes the importance of recognizing and respecting the diverse cultural values, beliefs and practices that exist within a society. Now you need to mention here about the viewpoint of Himlika and Bhikhu Parekh. Why? Because they are the prime exponents of this approach. That how they have given a very vivid description that how people belonging to different cultural backgrounds may have varying interpretation of rights. Matlab, people belonging to American society and people belonging to Middle Eastern societies, they will have varying interpretation of rights. Just for example, recently in Saudi Arabia, a journalist was hanged. Now, yes, it came into news a couple of days back that Mohammed bin Salman said that I'm ashamed of what has happened, but it is the law of the land. Now, for Westerners, it was a very wrong judgment, but for Saudi society, it was not a wrong judgment. तो इसीलिए people belonging to, if somebody is from Saudi Arabia and goes to United States of America, so they will have differing perception of rights. What American thinks is correct may not be thought so by people belonging to Middle Eastern countries. So Bhikhu Parekh and Will Kimlicka says that people from different cultural backgrounds may have varying interpretation of rights which can be influenced by their own historical, social and religious factors, and therefore it becomes important to strike a proper balance between universal human rights and cultural relativism. That is why people said that Mahathir Mohamad, he talked about Asian values. That is why that is why Middle Eastern states, they also criticize United States of America on a number of occasions. They said that America's project of democracy will not be acceptable. America's project of democracy at gunpoint will not be acceptable to us. Because what will be acceptable to you will be influenced by your own culture, the society in which you have lived throughout your life, and the culture through which you are operating. That is why there is a need to maintain a balance between human rights and cultural relativism. And then I have mentioned here that fundamental rights like freedom of speech and expression, liberty, it should be upheld universally. But at the same time, it is also crucial to accommodate cultural nuances. Nuances means cultural finer points must be accommodated. उन cultural finer points को भी आपको accommodate करने की जरूरत है. So certain rights like freedom of religion or cultural expressions, it may manifest differently across culture. Why? Because people have lived in different societies, in different cultural context, and people have also lived in different kind of system, different kind of setup that have influenced their viewpoint. And then I have mentioned about respecting multicultural perspective on rights doesn't mean compromising on human rights standards. यहाँ पर at the same time you also need to maintain a balance between your interpretation of rights, at the same time about universal human rights. So respecting multicultural perspectives on rights doesn't mean कि आपको compromise करना है human rights standards के साथ, and that is why there is a need to have dialogue, education, tolerance in order to make people understand about human rights, in order to make people understand about rights, and then provide a brief conclusion. And your conclusion, it should not exceed more than 25 to 30 words. मैं हमेशा बच्चों को ये बोलता रहता हूँ कि बहुत ज़्यादा नॉलेज होना इज नॉट सफिशिएंट, बहुत ज़्यादा नॉलेज होने से आप एग्जाम नहीं क्लियर करेंगे. द पॉइंट इज whether you have been able to express your ideas in 150 words or not. Now that's a difficult task because you have got tremendous amount of information at your disposal. In fact, you are suffering from information overload, so that makes things very challenging for you. Then there comes another question. The question is fairly direct. N number of times this question has been asked by UPSC. N number of times. I'm not saying that once or twice. If you will go through the question paper of last 30 years, at least 7-8 times they have asked this question. This question is a repeated question. So even normative theory question is a repeated one. That is why I said that 80% of the question in optional paper are repeated. At least themes will be repeated, that's a guarantee. So the question is state of nature as a state of war. It's a Hobbesian statement. अब यहाँ पर आप एक ब्रीफ इंट्रो दे सकते हैं थॉमस हॉब्स के स्टेट ऑफ नेचर के बारे में. दैट हाउ ही सेज दैट स्टेट ऑफ नेचर इज अ स्टेट ऑफ वॉर एंड इट इज अ फाउंडेशनल आइडिया ऑफ पॉलिटिकल फिलॉसफी. क्या था स्टेट ऑफ नेचर? सो स्टेट ऑफ नेचर वाज अ स्टेट where man's life was poor, nasty, brutish and short. Where man's life was not secured, every man was after another man. So man's right to life, liberty and property was not secured. So there was obviously problem of order existing in such a society. And how Hobbes gave the solution to resolve this problem of order. So Hobbes gave the solution to resolve this problem of order is by surrendering your rights in front of a sovereign. You surrender your rights in front of a sovereign, and that is how your security dilemma will be resolved forever. So briefly you will mention about this state of nature as a state of war, and how this state of nature in which man's life poor, nasty, brutish and short can be escaped. So you can escape from this chaotic state of affairs by surrendering your rights in front of sovereign, which Thomas Hobbes calls as Leviathan, a sea monster. This Leviathan is an authority having preponderance of power, in front of whom you have surrendered all your rights in exchange for order in society. That is why I told you that in Hobbesian state of nature, it was a Hobbesian state of nature in which man's right to life, liberty and property was not secured. Man's life was poor, nasty, brutish and short in Hobbesian state of nature. And then you can briefly mention about that Hobbes' view of a state of nature may appear bleak because it gives the idea of an all-powerful state. We also need to maintain a balance between the authority of a state and individual liberty. जिस समय आप mention करेंगे, you can mention this point also, and that is how. So briefly, in conclusion, you will say that his ideas have contributed greatly to the modern political thought, but at the same time, it also sparks a debate between balance between individual liberty and authority of a state in contemporary politics. So state's authority, it must be limited. It must not be unlimited as it was stated by Thomas Hobbes. Because Thomas Hobbes, what does he say? He says that in the state of nature, man's right to life, liberty and property was not secured. Every person was suffering from security dilemma. And in order to resolve this security dilemma, in order to resolve this problem of order, only one thing he suggested, rather he provided a very naive solution. He said that you surrender your rights in front of a sovereign. If you are able to surrender your rights in front of a sovereign, then this problem of order can be resolved. So he gave the idea of an all-powerful state. Now the point is certainly it has sparked a debate between individual liberty and authority of a state. And that is why there is a need to maintain a balance between these two. But you do not need to delve so deep into this idea because this question is only of 150 words. तो यहां पर ब्रीफली आप इसको कंक्लूड करेंगे, ब्रीफली ओनली इन 25 to 30 words. And then next question is on Foucault's concept of power. Now Foucault's concept of power is different. जो ट्रेडिशनल कंसेप्ट ऑफ पावर है वो क्या है, हमें एग्जाम में मेंशन नहीं करना है, लेकिन ट्रेडिशनल कंसेप्ट ऑफ पावर क्या कहता है? ट्रेडिशनल कंसेप्ट ऑफ पावर कहता है व्हेन यू आर एबल टू गेट थिंग्स डन even in the face of resistance from other actor, then you have got power over other actors. So suppose there are two actors A and B, and A is able to get things done even in the face of resistance from B, which B otherwise would not do, then A has got power over B, क्योंकि A ने B से वो काम करवा लिया है जो B otherwise would not do. But Foucault's concept of power is complex. It is not as simple as the traditional notion of power says. And Foucault's traditional notion of power, it talks about power as something as a means of domination, a top-down approach, a means of domination, a repressing force. But Foucault's concept of power is multifaceted and it is also complex. Foucault's concept of power you can associate, you can relate with the idea of power provided by Hannah Arendt, wherein she says that power is not a means of domination, it is a means of cooperation to get things done. So, Foucault's concept of power is relational. Relational means in relation to some other actors and it is not fixed. So, power is not always repressive as the traditional notion of power says. The traditional notion of power, it says that when you are able to get things done even in the face of resistance from other actor, when you are able to get things done even in the face of resistance from another actor, ये नहीं कहता है, ये कहता है that power it can be creative also, it can be cooperation also. It says that it can also be creative and it can shape individual and societal behavior. And power it comes from everywhere, and power is synonymous with knowledge, and power is constituted via accepted forms of knowledge. Here you can also mention about the viewpoint of Daniel Bell. Political science में थोड़ा सा आपको स्कॉलर्स को कोट करना होता है, केवल आप ब्रीफ आइडिया भी अगर स्कॉलर्स के बारे में जानते हैं तो आपका काम हो जाता है. इनफैक्ट आपको सारे टॉपिक पे 2-3 स्कॉलर्स के बारे में पता होना चाहिए, खुद ही ऑटोमेटिकली याद हो जाएगा. So Daniel Bell said that in 21st century the locus of economic power will be shifted to universities, and this is precisely what has happened. You can also link his idea of power with the idea of power provided by Hannah Arendt, that how power can be a means of cooperation and not a means of domination. And then in conclusion, you will provide a very brief and crisp conclusion of 25-30 words that how Foucault's concept of power overturned and the established notion of power as repressing force and how it became a day-to-day concept. So his idea of power is creative as compared to the traditional means of power. जो traditional means of power है, that is not creative, but his idea of power is creative. And then let us move on to another question. So another question is decline of political theory. Now this is fairly a direct question. This question has been asked many times, and this question you will find in any material. In fact, all the questions you will find in any material. It's not about this or that. You will find in any material, you will find in any book. So decline of political theory. Now give a brief background of the decline of, why there happened a decline of political theory. So this decline of political theory happened because classical tradition, it focused upon what ought to be. Classical tradition, it focused upon value judgment. So David Easton writes that political theory today is interested primarily in the history of ideas. The point is that David Easton, he criticized political theory by criticizing Sabine and C.L. Vapor, and he says that historicism is the reason that led to the decline of political theory. It means that all the social and cultural phenomena are being traced to the historical factors. Now this is not entirely correct. that everything cannot be traced to only historical factors. And moreover, historical factors, and then he says that historicism, it is because of historicism that we are witnessing decline of political theory. And what do we mean by historicism? It means that social and cultural phenomena are determined by history, and the tendency to regard historical development as the most basic aspect of human existence is historicism. Now, this viewpoint was criticized, and this viewpoint, moreover, moral relativism also was criticized, and David Easton criticized Weber and Hume's moral relativism. Hyperfactualism was also one of the reasons for decline of political theory, that there was too much emphasis upon facts. Now, too much emphasis upon facts will leave you nowhere, because in order to understand social and political phenomena, you also need to take into account the aspects of value. By neglecting values, social and political phenomena cannot be understood. Why? Because human meanings and motives are involved. Wherever human meanings and motives are involved, always remember this fact, that it cannot be completely factual. वहाँ पर आपको जहाँ ह्यूमन मीनिंग्स और मोटिव्स को आपको समझना है, वहाँ पर you also need to understand about a lot of factors, a lot of other things. So this was one of the reasons for the decline of political theory. And then you can mention here about Dante Germino's criticism of positivism. That Dante Germino, he focuses upon, he criticizes positivism, कि जहाँ पर सारी ही चीज़ें फैक्चुअल इंफॉर्मेशन पर फोकस किया जाता था, ऑब्जर्वेबल और वेरीफाइबल एस्पेक्ट्स पर फोकस किया जाता था, एंड दैट वाज क्रिटिसाइज्ड बाय दांते जर्मिनो. अगर आपको पेपर में याद आता है तो, हालांकि पेपर के प्रेशर में याद आना थोड़ा सा मुश्किल हो जाता है, लेकिन मेरा मानना है कि अगर आप कोई भी एक सोर्स ढंग से पढ़ेंगे और जहां पर ये सारी चीजें मेंशन की हुई होती है दांते जर्मिनो और बाकी चीजों के बारे में, एंड देन यू कैन राइट अबाउट, ब्रीफली यू विल कंक्लूड that even though decline of political theory happened, it was mentioned by David Easton, but that's not a consensus view, because many scholars, they continue to find value in political theory and it remains a vibrant field of study. That's how you will conclude the question. Now, second question, success of contemporary democracies lies in the state limiting its own power. Now, explain. This is a 20 marker. Now, a 20 marker question is, attempting a 20 marker is less challenging. क्यों less challenging है? कि इसलिए less challenging है कि यहाँ पर आपके पास थोड़ा सा breadth, थोड़ा सा आंसर लिखने के लिए स्पेस होता है. You can start your question with the recent survey of Pew Foundation. It means the survey was done by Pew Research Center across 27 countries, in which it was found out that almost 51% people are not satisfied with democracy today. The question पूछा है, success of contemporary democracies lies in the state limiting its own power. It means that there are challenges before democracy, and that is why there is a need to a state limiting its own power. Now, what needs to be done? Here you will focus upon that states needs to keep in mind the principle of checks and balances. State needs to keep in mind individual liberty. State limitation of a state's power is necessary for ensuring protection of individual rights. It is also necessary in the context of preventing authoritarian trends, as self-imposed limitations on power prevents this descent into autocracy, and by restricting its own authority, the state promotes accountability. So, in order to maintain rule of law, there is a need to limit the powers of a state to foster stability and trust. And now conclude by emphasizing on the need of striking a balance between authority of a state and protection of individual liberty, and limitation of the power of a state in the greater good of society. That's how you will wind up this question. Relatively an easier question. अगर आपको Pew Research Survey याद है तो आपके लिए और भी आसान हो जाएगा, नहीं याद है तो कोई बात नहीं. This question again has been asked many times in civil services exam. At least 3-4 times this question has been asked. Last time the syllabus was changed in 2013. In the last 7-8 years, in the last 10 years, they've asked this question not less than 3 times. At least themes are repeated. So the question is, Rawls's idea of liberal self is too individualistic. Explain in this context the communitarian critique of Rawls's theory of justice. In fact, syllabus भी यही है. Syllabus भी Rawls's theory of justice का communitarian critique of justice है. अगर कहीं पर भी तुम देखोगे तो बहुत ही बेसिक मटेरियल से करने के बाद भी आपका काम हो जाएगा. Now, in this question, you will mention about communitarian critique of Rawlsian theory of justice, which is centered around liberal self as over individualistic, and man is situated self. We are connected with each others. We are not too individualistic. We are not atomized individual. Rather, we are situated self. We are connected with each other. So, communitarians like Michael Sandel, you can express the viewpoint. You can mention here about the viewpoint of Michael Sandel, who is a leading communitarian of the world. And Michael Sandel, he says that that man is a situated self. और ये क्यों ऐसा कहा? Because Rawls's theory of justice, it tends to provide too individualistic description of human being. Now, providing this too individualistic description of human being will not give the real picture of man, and that is why it is being said that is why communitarians, they criticized a Rawlsian idea of justice, and therefore it fails to take into account the culture community in shaping the notion of justice. क्योंकि मैंने आपको पहले भी कहा था कि जो Rawls's theory of justice है वो एक यूनिवर्सल थियोरी ऑफ जस्टिस के बारे में बात करता है, एक ग्रैंड थियोरी ऑफ जस्टिस के बारे में बात करता है, एंड इट इज टू इंडिविजुअलिस्टिक. It places a lot of premium on the individual, and it does not take into account the role of culture and community in shaping the notion of justice. Okay. So that is too much criticism of John Rawls. हमें यहाँ वो तो खैर नहीं लिखना है, लेकिन रॉल्स ने बाद में अपने आप को डिफेंड किया था और कहा था कि उन्होंने वेस्टर्न सोसाइटी के लिए ही ये बात कही है. खैर, सो यू कैन प्रोवाइड द व्यू पॉइंट ऑफ माइकल सैंडल हियर that Rawls's concept of original position and wheel of ignorance assume that rational individuals, when detached from their particular identities and circumstances, would formulate principles of justice that prioritize individual rights and freedoms. Now, communitarians argue that this approach neglects the fact that individuals are deeply embedded in communities with shared values. So, individuals are not too individualistic, rather they are embedded self or situated self. They are connected with each other. That is why I said that they are embedded in communities with shared values, traditions, culture, and these communal ties profoundly influences moral outlooks of the people and their sense of justice. तुम किस सोसाइटी में और कल्चर में ऑपरेट करते हो, that is also going to profoundly shape your idea of justice. So your idea of justice is not being too individualistic, not dependent upon you only, rather it is contingent upon the society in which you are living, and your culture will also influence your idea of justice, your notion of justice. And then I mentioned here that communitarians, they emphasize that a just society should recognize and incorporate the moral and cultural diversity within it, and communitarians, they criticize Rawls for not giving sufficient attention to the importance of cultural communities and traditions in shaping people's ethical frameworks, and then provide a brief conclusion. You can say that communitarian critique underscores the tension between individualism and communitarianism in discourse of justice. And Rawls's theory of justice leans too heavily towards individual self, neglecting the rich tapestry of cultural influences that shape our understanding of justice. So our understanding of justice is not too individualistic. It is contingent upon, as I told you, a number of factors that influences your idea of justice. It is contingent upon the society in which you are operating, the people with whom you are living. All will influence your idea of justice. That is why in conclusion you can mention that Rawls's theory leans too heavily towards individual self and neglecting the situated self or embedded self. It does not take into account the rich tapestry of cultural influences that shape our understanding of justice. That's how you will wind up this question. Next, questions are fairly direct. Now, credo of relevance. This one question, ये क्वेश्चन भी आपको सारी जगहों पे सारे बुक्स में मिल जाएगा. कोई भी रेलेवेंट सोर्स अगर आप पढ़ेंगे वहां पर आपको credo of relevance मिल जाएगा. So now this credo of relevance is a concept that was proposed by David Easton. इसमें credo of relevance में David Easton has talked about major traits of post behavioralism and it was a response to the limitations of behavioralism. कि जहां जो credo of relevance क्वेश्चन कहता है credo of relevance in post behavioralism advocates the importance of action science analyze. 50 मार्कर है ये. यहां पर आपको केवल एक बात ध्यान में रखने की जरूरत है that credo of यहां पर आपको डेविड ईस्टन को मेंशन करना होगा अपने इंट्रोडक्शन में. focused on 7 major traits of post behavioralism and it was a response to the limitations of behavioralism. And in his credo of relevance, Easton focused on the importance of action science to make discipline more relevant and responsive to the real world issue. कहा डेविड ईस्टन ने कि हमें डिसिप्लिन को ज्यादा रेलेवेंट बनाने की जरूरत है to solve the problems of people, to solve social problem. And political science को केवल observable behavior को ही स्टडी नहीं करनी है. Political science should not only study observable behavior while ignoring the pressing social problems of society. Problem क्या था behavioralism में? Behavioralism में focus ये था that too much it was an attempt to scienticize the discipline. There was too much focus upon scientific tools. Now scientific tools have got utility only a certain point, only till a certain point, because human beings are involved in studying political phenomena. You also need to understand the meanings and motives behind any particular action of individual, and that is why David Easton was of the view that we do not need to focus only upon the idea of what you call, we do not need to focus only upon facts or scientific tools. Rather, we also need to take into account a valuational aspect, values. And then अब यहां पर credo of relevance आपको लेकिन एक बात डेविड ईस्टन के बारे में पता होना चाहिए that it was given by डेविड ईस्टन. It is a factual question. इस क्वेश्चन का आंसर इज नॉट डिफिकल्ट, लेकिन अगर आपको ये पता नहीं है, आपको याद नहीं आ रहा एग्जाम में, तो फिर थोड़ा सा आंसर लिखना इस क्वेश्चन का मुश्किल होगा. ये रिलेटिवली फ्लैट क्वेश्चन है, फैक्चुअल क्वेश्चन है, इसका आंसर लिखना इज नॉट अ चैलेंजिंग टास्क, लेकिन आपको एटलीस्ट पता होना चाहिए अबाउट डेविड ईस्टन. And then you can mention about that political scientists should actively engage with policy makers, practitioners to address real world issues. And there is a need to have interdisciplinary approach to tackle geopolitical issues. And then you will focus, you will provide a brief and a positive conclusion. Now the focus will be on action in political theory and how credo of relevance is making the discipline more responsive to societal needs for policy making. क्योंकि डेविड ईस्टन ने ही कहा कि पर्पस क्या होना चाहिए, पर्पस ये होना चाहिए डिसिप्लिन का that whether the discipline is able to solve social problems or not. If the discipline is not able to solve social problem, then it is going to lose its purpose. It must solve social problems. And then let us move on to the next question. The next question is, Fascism displays an ambivalent stance towards parliamentary democracy. Explain. Again, ये एक ऐसा टॉपिक है जिसको नॉर्मली बच्चे स्किप कर देते हैं, आइडियोलॉजीज वाला सेक्शन. मैं हमेशा बच्चों से ये एडवाइस करता हूं कि एटलीस्ट आप सारे टॉपिक को ऐसा करके जाइए कि अगर कुछ बेसिक क्वेश्चन आता है तो वो आपका ना छूटे, क्योंकि ट्रेडिशनल तरीके से तैयारी करने पे भी पेपर क्लियर नहीं होगा. यू कैन हैव अ लुक एट द कॉम्पोजिशन ऑफ द क्वेश्चन, that they have started neglecting Western political thought, Indian political thought. The focus is on entire syllabus and they are asking question from almost every topic of the syllabus. It means that you need to thoroughly prepare the syllabus. Don't go too deep, but you try to learn all the aspects of the syllabus, all the topics of the syllabus. Fascism displays an ambivalent stance towards parliamentary democracy. Fascism, it did not speak highly of parliamentary democracy. So you can mention here initially about fascism that it was a socio-political system that came into existence in Italy 1922. And this ideology, it gives importance to a state only. So nothing is beyond the state, nothing is above the state, and nothing is unrelated to a state and against the state. And it focuses too much upon collectivism. And then in body part, you will briefly mention about the key tenets of parliamentary democracy like freedom of speech and expression, protection of minority rights, protection of individual rights, freedom of speech and expression, and separation of power. And these key tenets of parliamentary democracy was not liked by fascists. Rather, they focused upon unlimited power to the state. So, and then you will briefly provide a heading that fascism, it provides an ambivalent stance towards parliamentary democracy, in which you will first point it rejects liberal democratic values, and it rejects liberal democratic values through authority and justice, and this is against parliamentary democracy because parliamentary democracy is based upon the idea of liberty, equality and fraternity. Parliamentary democracy liberty, equality, fraternity के principle पर based है और उसको ये completely disregard करता है. And then it provides no scope for political pluralism, that is, there is absolutely no scope for opposition. Now, without opposition, parliamentary democracy, there is no parliamentary democracy. If you have parliamentary democracy, you need to have an opposition, and there was complete, they abhorred any opposition to a state. And then, third point you can mention here that they seeks to establish a corporate state. Then, they believes in elitism, whereas democratic ethos, it seeks to establish an egalitarian society, and their focus was upon concentration of power and not upon their focus was not upon separation of power, rather concentration of power. Again, a very fairly direct question, provided you know about fascism. अगर आपको fascism के बारे में पता है तो आप आंसर बड़े आराम से दे देंगे. इसमें आपको एक ही चीज करना था, आपको सिलेबस की बेसिक बातें पता होनी थी इस पूरे के पूरे पेपर में. And then you will provide a brief conclusion that fascism was a reactionary ideology and its authoritarian, anti-liberal nature was the main cause for its divergence with parliamentary democracy. एक और बात आपको ध्यान में रखनी है, when you write an answer, always use the phrase, the term that has been provided under the question. क्वेश्चन की टर्मिनोलॉजीज को अपने आंसर में हमेशा यूज करना इज अ वेरी गुड आइडिया. क्यों क्वेश्चन की टर्मिनोलॉजी को अपने आंसर में यूज करना इज अ वेरी गुड आइडिया? बिकॉज दैट गिव्स एग्जामिनर अ फीलिंग दैट यू हैव अंडरस्टूड द क्वेश्चन, and that will give a feeling to examiner that you have written a well thought out answer. You have not written a random answer. So, next question is again an easy question. There was only one tough question, or I won't call it a tough question, but different from other question, was of Eurocentrism. इसके बाद जो क्वेश्चन आने वाला है, otherwise all the questions वो सब जगह पे आपको दिख जाएगा. So affirmative action policies draws as much a strong criticism as a strong support. Analyze this statement in the context of equality. अब यहाँ पर अगर आप पूरे इस क्वेश्चन को रियलाइज देखेंगे तो आपको इस क्वेश्चन को 3-4 पार्ट में डिवाइड करना है. पहला, एफर्मेटिव एक्शन पॉलिसीज को आपको डिफाइन करना होगा इंट्रोडक्शन में. इट इज इसके फेवर में जो लोग बोल रहे हैं, इसके अगेंस्ट जो इसके लिए जो क्रिटिसिज्म है और स्ट्रॉन्ग सपोर्ट है, उनको अलग अलग हेडिंग देकर के लिखना होगा. एनालाइज इन द कंटेक्स्ट ऑफ इक्वालिटी, and then finally you will provide a brief conclusion. So what do we mean by affirmative action? Briefly describe about the nature of affirmative action policy. Affirmative action अगर आप NCERT में भी पढ़ेंगे, वहां पर भी affirmative action पर एक बड़ा अच्छा चैप्टर दिया हुआ है political theory के NCERT में, and they have very clearly mentioned that The purpose of affirmative action is to resolve structural inequalities, the built-in inequalities that is present in the society, and it is a type of redistribution strategy. The objective of affirmative action is to remove structural inequalities which exist among groups. जो ग्रुप्स के बीच में स्ट्रक्चरल इनइक्वालिटीज हैं, affirmative action का concept, affirmative action policies, it tries to remove those built-in structural inequalities existing among groups, and then provide positive features of affirmative action policies. क्योंकि इसके फेवर में स्ट्रॉन्ग सपोर्ट भी और स्ट्रॉन्ग क्रिटिसिज्म भी है. तो जो पॉजिटिव फीचर्स है वो क्या है? affirmative action is not like differential treatment जो अपार्थीड के पीरियड में साउथ अफ्रीका में हुआ करता था. राजीव भार्गवा, he makes a distinction between affirmative action and preferential treatment. Preferential treatment में आप किसी के फेवर में कोई पॉलिसी बनाते हैं जो सोसाइटी को डोमिनेट कर रहा है. जैसे आप देखेंगे कि तमिलियंस के अगेंस्ट सिंगलीज ने जो पॉलिसीज बनानी शुरू की थी आफ्टर श्रीलंका's independence in 1948, that can be taken as 48, that can be taken as an example of preferential treatment. या मैंने आपको एग्जांपल दिया साउथ अफ्रीका में जो अपार्थीड की पॉलिसी हुआ करती थी, and then it rectifies historical injustices, because I told you that given built-in structural inequalities will be addressed through affirmative action policies, and then it provides the level playing field in society. Affirmative action is positive in nature, and the aim of this action is to bring disadvantaged section of society at par with other sections of society. And finally, you will provide criticism of affirmative action policies. Criticism क्या है? Some consider it as reverse discrimination by a state. कि built-in structural inequalities है, but the way affirmative action policies have been implemented, it leads to reverse discrimination by the state. Merit, it is not in line with the idea of a meritocratic society where merit will dominate. Here merit suffers, and there is also political misuse, especially in a third world country it can be misused, and instead of ending social discrimination it may perpetuate the differences. So the purpose of affirmative action, the philosophy behind affirmative action was to remove structural inequalities, and those structural inequalities are missing. You will not be able to remove those structural inequalities through affirmative action because of its misuse. And finally, you will provide a suggestion of way forward. Why? Because it's a problem. इसके अगेंस्ट भी व्यू है, इसके फेवर में व्यू है, तो तुम वे फॉरवर्ड बहुत ही लॉजिकल कंक्लूजन प्रोवाइड करोगे कि आंद्रे बेते का कहना है, आंद्रे बेते को कोट करते हुए, affirmative action policies, it should be temporary and it should not be forever. Why? Because if it becomes permanent, then it means it is the defect of the policy itself. क्योंकि पर्पस affirmative action का क्या है? पर्पस affirmative action का है to remove structural inequalities. अगर तुमने structural inequalities को remove कर दिया तो पॉलिसी को बंद करने की जरूरत है. It should not be forever. आंद्रे बेते ने कहा कि फिर तो वो डिस्क्रिमिनेशन ही हो जाएगा, and it will lead to the defect of the policy itself, क्योंकि वो फिर वो पॉलिसी का डिफेक्ट बताता है. That is why it should not be forever. अब यहां पर आप स्कॉलर्स को पॉलिटिकल साइंस में क्वेश्चन का जब आप आंसर दे रहे हैं तो यहां पर यू आर कोटिंग स्कॉलर्स वेरी फ्रिक्वेंटली. हर आंसर में लगभग 1-2 स्कॉलर 3 स्कॉलर हम लोग कोट कर रहे हैं. यहीं पर ये डिफरेंट होता है जनरल स्टडीज से. आगे अभी हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे जैसे इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स में. यू विल रियलाइज कि इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स में जो अप्रोच होगा और यहां पर जो अप्रोच होगा दोनों में फर्क है. इंडियन पॉलिटी में जो अप्रोच होगा और इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स में अप्रोच होगा दोनों में फर्क है. फर्क क्यों है? वहां पर स्कॉलर्स बहुत ज्यादा यूज होगा, यहां पर स्कॉलर्स बहुत कम यूज होगा. तो पॉलिटिकल साइंस का जो आपका आंसर होना चाहिए, इट शुड बी मोर एकेडमिक इन नेचर. सामने वाले को ये फील आना चाहिए कि आपने स्कॉलर्स को जगह जगह पे कोट किया है, अपने व्यू पॉइंट को सब्सटैंशिएट करने के लिए स्कॉलर्स के आर्ग्यूमेंट को आपने पिक किया है. सो नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज Eurocentrism is both the target and the motive force of post-colonial political theory. Discuss. अब इस क्वेश्चन में क्या क्या पार्ट है? पहले इंट्रोडक्शन में यूरोसेंट्रिज्म को आप डिफाइन करेंगे. दूसरा, यूरोसेंट्रिज्म is the target of post-colonial political theory. Second part, third part, Eurocentrism is the motive force of post-colonial political theory, and then you will provide a brief conclusion. So, total there are 4 parts in this question. Every part it must be well defined. So, first part of the question, in introduction, you will provide briefly mention about Eurocentrism and how it is being viewed by the post-colonial theory. So, Eurocentrism, it defines the prevalence of European culture, history, etc. It is a concern for the post-colonial theory because this theory emerged in the response to enduring impacts of colonialism and imperialism. अब यहाँ पर Eurocentrism as a target and motive force, part 2 में आपको mention करना है for post-colonial theorists. So, first Eurocentrism as a target. Target क्या है? It challenges cultural hegemony, perpetuated dominance exerted by European culture and ethos. Then, these countries suffered from colonialism and hence targeted against Eurocentrism and biased narrative. They challenge the narrative of European scholars that seek to ensure the supremacy of European narrative. And then, Eurocentrism as the motive for post-colonial theory. One, it has helped the scholars to analyze the following. One, neocolonialism, which has been exerted through globalization. How globalization is leading to neocolonialism. How globalization is leading to neo-imperialism. Then, identity and resistance. Non-European communities have asserted themselves to help realize their identities and ethos. And third, global solidarity. For example, movement like non-aligned movement, South-South cooperation. All these, it's a motive force for those. So, post-colonial countries have depicted solidarity against colonial and imperialist forces as seen in NAM and South-South cooperation, and then provide a brief conclusion on general nature of post-colonial theory on Eurocentrism. A very brief conclusion in 25 words. इस क्वेश्चन का आंसर लिखना आपके लिए चैलेंजिंग इसलिए होगा बिकॉज देर आर मेनी पार्ट्स इन दिस क्वेश्चन. इवन इफ यू नो द आंसर, आपके लिए ऐसे क्वेश्चन का आंसर देना पेपर में चैलेंजिंग हो जाता है. उसके पीछे का रीजन इज वेरी क्लियर. रीजन इसलिए बहुत क्लियर है कि एग्जाम के उस प्रेशर में क्या आपका माइंड सोच पाता है. अगर आपने बहुत ज्यादा प्रैक्टिस की हुई है तो आपका ब्रेन सोच पाएगा. अगर आपने प्रैक्टिस कम की हुई है आपका ब्रेन नहीं सोच पाएगा, प्रॉब्लम रहेगी वहां पर. तो सो नेक्स्ट वन इज बुद्धिस्ट थॉट ऑन धम्मा facilitates the emancipation of political action. Explain. So, Buddhist thought on Dhamma, particularly in the context of Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, can indeed facilitate the emancipation of political action in several ways. मतलब आप एक बहुत ही पॉजिटिव इंट्रो देते हुए कहेंगे कि बुद्धिस्ट जो इन्होंने बोला है क्वेश्चन में, आप उसी चीज को पैराफ्रेज करेंगे अपने वर्ड्स में. That Buddhist thought on Dhamma facilitates the emancipation of political action. आप बताएंगे कि Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path can indeed facilitate the emancipation of political action in several ways. Now body में आप क्या लिखेंगे? First, interconnectedness. अगर आपको वहां पर याद है तो Buddhist philosophy underscored the interconnectedness of all being and phenomena. इसको contemporary environmental issue से आप कनेक्ट कर सकते हैं. This perspective can encourage a more holistic approach to political decision making. और environmental और social repercussion of policies को भी it will take into account. Then, second, you can mention about right livelihood. Another aspect of Eightfold Path is right livelihood, which encourages individuals to engage in occupations that are morally sound and do not harm others. This principle can further guide leaders and policymakers to make decisions to ensure welfare of people. आपको वो प्रोफेशन लेना है, वो लाइवलीहुड इंश्योर करना है that is morally sound and do not harm others. An emphasis on suffering, the first noble truth. It acknowledges the existence of suffering This recognition can drive political actors to address societal suffering and inequalities, and so that those policymakers can work towards creating a just and humane society. तो बेसिकली इस क्वेश्चन में आपको बताना क्या है? इस क्वेश्चन में आपको बताना है that Buddhist thought on Dhamma facilitates the emancipation of political action. कैसे Buddhist thought on Dhamma it will facilitate emancipation of political actions. ये है इस क्वेश्चन का की. And then you will provide a conclusion that it offers a framework that encourages individual to engage in political action, prioritizing ethics, compassion and well-being of all beings, and that is how you will wind up this question. So now come on to the next question. Next question is another direct question. J. Smill's views, जो उन्होंने women subordination के बारे में कहा है कि it is wrong. तो यहाँ पर है the legal subordination of one sex to another is wrong in itself, and now one of the chief hindrances to human development. J. Smill comment. Now this statement shows J. Smill's belief in the principle of gender equality. J. Smill's belief that one half of the humanity's talent could not go wasted. So J. Smill is of the view that there should be gender justice. J. Smill said that there existed legal subordination of one sex to another, which is still prevalent today. And Mill identified it as hindrance to human development. Mill का कहना है कि अगर one sex will dominate another sex, this will become a hindrance to human development. If human being is to realize itself completely, fully, then one half of the humanity's talent should not go waste. And then you will provide this viewpoint. The J. Smill believed that individuals should be treated as equals regardless of their sex, and any legal system which perpetuates gender hierarchy, कोई भी ऐसा legal system which perpetuates gender hierarchy, gives preference to males over female, is flawed. Ethically it's a flawed assumption. And then सोसाइटी अगर किसी एक अपने एक पार्ट के अपॉर्चुनिटीज को लिमिट करना चाहती है, राइट्स को लिमिट करना चाहती है, तो उनका जो पोटेंशियल होगा सोसाइटी के बेटरमेंट में जो यूज किया जा सकता है, दैट विल नॉट बी यूज्ड. Another important problem. And then finally, equality is a catalyst for social progress. अगर तुमने social progress ensure करना है, so equality is a catalyst, and both men and women can have equal rights and opportunities. Societies tend to be more innovative, economically prosperous and socially harmonious. So Mill's statement, अब आप इसको contemporary time से connect करेंगे. That Mill's statement, it is relevant even in contemporary times. You will connect Mill's statement with contemporary discussion on gender equality and gender justice. So like disparities in pay, representation and leadership roles. You can mention about the recently passed bill in parliament that gives reservation, 33% reservation to women. You can mention here that how those steps have been taken to ensure gender justice. Then again a fairly direct question. So another question is that Sri Aurobindo's idea of swaraj, ये भी पहले पूछा हुआ question है. Idea of swaraj has deep significance in Indian social, political and cultural history. So what was Aurobindo's idea of swaraj? Aurobindo's idea of swaraj about emancipation of individuals, politically, socially, ethically and culturally. So Aurobindo Ghosh's idea of swaraj was a response to British view that India is not a nation. India is only a geographical entity created by British. So Aurobindo Ghosh in his immortal idea said that India is neither a piece of land, nor a figure of speech, nor a figment of one's imagination. He said that India is a mighty Shakti composed of billions of Shaktis. And that's how Aurobindo Ghosh, he tried to do things. That's how Aurobindo Ghosh, he tried to awaken the soul of the nation. And then you will come on to the body part of the question, that Sri Aurobindo's idea of Swaraj has deep significance for Indian social, political and cultural history. Now, political liberation. So, Aurobindo, it was a rallying cry for political liberation from British colonial rule. Aurobindo said that we should be freed from British colonial rule, and Swaraj represented the idea that Indians should govern themselves, free from domination from any external powers. A spiritual foundation. Spiritual foundation, Aurobindo ने कहा कि his vision was for self-realized, a spiritual awakened nation that will govern itself wisely. That is why Sri Aurobindo said that India is neither a piece of land, nor a figure of speech, nor a figment of one's imagination. India is a mighty Shakti composed of billions of Shaktis. He called it divinity personified, and he called this entity called India as Bharat Mata. And that is how he went on to give his religio-mystical approach to awaken the soul of the nation. So that is why I have mentioned here that it provided a spiritual foundation, and it also provided cultural renaissance to Indians. He advocated for a reconnection with India's rich and cultural heritage, including its philosophy, art and spirituality. इसके पीछे का रीजन क्या था? इसके पीछे का रीजन ये था that he was answering the attempt of British to instill this thought in the minds of Indians that India is not a nation. He was answering this attempt, and he said that India is a divinity personified. He called it Bharat Mata, that existed since time immemorial. So, next one is, and his philosophy of integral yoga, which seeks to harmonization of individual and collective, has left a lasting impact on the Indian psyche and governance and philosophy. And then you will provide conclusion that Swaraj is obeying the law of our existence. We are humans, we should not live like animals, and we should live in harmony with others, including the environment. So that's how you will wind up your question related to Sri Aurobindo. Then another question, it is based on paper 1 section B. Paper 1 section B related to Indian government and politics. ये जो इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स से रिलेटेड अगर आप पूरे के पूरे टॉपिक को देखेंगे, सो रिलेटिवली नॉट अ डिफिकल्ट टॉपिक, रिलेटिवली इजी टॉपिक, कैन इजीली बी डेल्ट विथ यू, जहां आपके लिए कोई भी चैलेंज नहीं होगा. यहाँ सबसे इंटरेस्टिंग बात है फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन, इट इज अबाउट द इम्प्रिंट ऑफ ब्रिटिश कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑन इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. नाउ इम्प्रिंट ऑफ ब्रिटिश कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑन इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, जहां आप देखेंगे कि इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन दैट वाज अडॉप्टेड इन 1950, it was influenced by various sources including historical documents and philosophical principle and constitutional systems of many countries. But the imprint of British on Indian constitution is all pervasive, very notable. Everywhere you will find the imprint. और यहाँ पर आप स्टार्ट करेंगे ये इंट्रोडक्शन पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन. अब बताएंगे उस इम्प्रिंट के बारे में, इम्प्रिंट ऑफ ब्रिटिश कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑन इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. तो वो इम्प्रिंट कहाँ कहाँ देखा जा सकता है? You will be starting with parliamentary system of government. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru ने ये कहा that Indians are well versed with British parliamentary system, starting with Morley-Minto reforms, and that was one of the reasons that India adopted parliamentary democracy. Then bicameral legislature, rule of law, independence of judiciary, fundamental rights, legislative procedures, single citizenship, all these are imprint of British British constitution on Indian constitution. You can also mention here about the viewpoint of India's former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh when he said that Indians owe greatly to the British. So India adopted from British parliamentary democracy, the notion of rule of law, civil services of India, all these were accepted by all those were adopted by Indians under the Indian constitution. And then you will conclude on a positive note. So conclude by highlighting the importance of Indian Constitution that drew inspiration from British system, but it also incorporated elements from other democracies to tailor to suit the needs of India. That is how you will wind up this question. The Indian government and politics वाला जो part है, that is fairly direct. Another part is environmentalism of poor. इसमें कुछ बहुत ही factual question है which I will not be discussing with you. Those are very factual questions, so there is no need to do so. I will give you a brief outline of those questions. So another one is environmentalism of poor. अब इसका क्या मतलब है? पहले ये समझो कि environmentalism of poor का क्या मतलब है? A set of social movements that arise from environmental conflicts where impoverished people struggle against powerful state or private interests that threaten their livelihood. Ramachandra Guha has given a vivid description of environmentalism of poor. He says that Indian environmental movements are different from British environmental movement. Are different from Western environmental movements. Western environmental movement seeks to improve quality of life, but Indian environmental movement does not seek the quality of life. The focus of Indian environmental movement is not the quality of life. Rather, the focus of environmental movement is the focus of environmental movement is not quality of life but survival aspect. तो जो भी environmental movement आप हिंदुस्तान में देखेंगे, it is related to the survival of the people. It is not about the quality of life as can be seen in Western countries. That is why Ramachandra Guha, he talks about this environmental movement in India is related to the survival of people, and he explains in detail, and then in body part you will explain in detail how peer people are connected to environment for their livelihood. For example, अगर तुम चिपको मूवमेंट देखोगे, अपीको मूवमेंट देखोगे, उड़ीसा के डोंगरिया कोंद मूवमेंट को तुम देखोगे, तो सारे मूवमेंट में तुम रियलाइज करोगे कि लोगों के लाइवलीहुड से रिलेटेड इंडिया का एनवायरमेंटल मूवमेंट है. That is why it has been mentioned here that environmentalism of the poor is often rooted in the life experiences of people who are directly impacted by environmental degradation. जैसे डोंगरिया कोंद ट्राइब ने उड़ीसा में वेदांता की जो रिफाइनरी थी उसके अगेंस्ट किया था मूवमेंट, जिसमें उनका ये कहना था कि भाई इसकी जो बॉक्साइट का माइंस होगा यहाँ, दैट इज गोइंग टू पोल्यूट nearby river and it is also going to affect environment greatly. And then environmentalism of the poor is not just about protecting environment, it is also about fighting for social justice and human rights. And poor people are often disproportionately affected by environmental problems. And then you will provide some example, as I told you, like Chipko movement, Narmada Bachao Andolan, Dungariya Kond movement, all these movements, and then finally provide a conclusion by highlighting the importance of environment on poor communities. You can quote here of Vandana Shiva. अब दो scholars को आपने यहाँ पर quote किया है. Same question अगर GS में आएगा, there is no need to quote the scholars. But if the question will be written in political science paper, you will quote a scholar. So you have quoted about Ramachandra Guha's viewpoint, and now you are quoting about Vandana Shiva's viewpoint. An environmental activist, scholars and author. She talks about sustainable agriculture. She was the one who talked about ecofeminism also. That how females are more sensitive towards the cause of environment. So, sustainable agriculture, biodiversity conservation and environmental justice. She has advocated for the rights of rural and indigenous communities in India and their role in environmental protection. तो इसलिए इस क्वेश्चन को जब आप पॉलिटिकल साइंस में लिखेंगे, so you will mention about scholars also. Now very direct question, I am not going to discuss this question here. Why? Because you will find the answer even in Lakshmikant, everywhere it is written. सब जगह पर आपको मिलेगा डिस्ट्रिक्ट प्लानिंग कमेटी के बारे में. Now Satyagraha and nationalism. Now both Satyagraha and nationalism are interconnected. So if you remember about Gandhian philosophy of Satyagraha, a book written by Judith Brown argues that Satyagraha is not just a political philosophy but a way of life, and she emphasizes upon the importance of Gandhi's ethical and spiritual teachings in the development of Satyagraha. Question पूछा है Satyagraha and Indian national movement, Indian nationalism. How Indian nationalism got influenced by the Gandhian philosophy of Satyagraha? गांधी के सत्याग्रह ने कैसे इंडियन नेशनलिज्म को इन्फ्लुएंस करने का काम किया. सो शी सेज दैट इट इज अ वे ऑफ लाइफ एंड शी हाईलाइट्स द इंपॉर्टेंस ऑफ Gandhi's ethical and spiritual teachings in the development of Satyagraha. So Satyagraha, as conceived by Gandhi, provides a moral and philosophical foundation for the Indian nationalist movement. It emphasized the principles of truth, non-violence and justice, which were central to Indian struggle for freedom. अब यहाँ पर आप बॉडी में एक्सप्लेन करेंगे रोल ऑफ सत्याग्रह विथ इंडियन नेशनलिज्म. जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल नॉन वायलेंस एज अ फोर्स. सो नॉन वायलेंस इट रिमेन्ड a central philosophy of Gandhi. And then you will mention about mobilization. It was an instrument of mobilizing, mass mobilization. It ensured, Satyagraha ensured mass mobilization. And then you will provide third point, that is peaceful resistance. That Indian nationalism through Satyagraha showcased to the world that people's movement could challenge the mighty colonial power. And then you will provide a brief conclusion. That is Satyagraha and Indian struggle. Erik Erikson argues that Satyagraha was a key instrument of Indian nationalism. He emphasizes the role of Mahatma Gandhi in developing and popularizing Satyagraha and argues that it was a uniquely Indian form of resistance. अब यहाँ पर एक ही चैलेंज आपके लिए है कि क्या आपको कोट याद रहेगा जिस समय आप आंसर लिखेंगे, क्योंकि I believe that anyone who has done the syllabus at least twice can answer this question, but the point is whether you will remember the quote. उसके लिए मैं बच्चों को एक सजेशन देता हूं कि हर टॉपिक से रिलेटेड कोट्स आप एक सेपरेट नोटबुक में लिख लीजिए. वो टॉपिक पढ़ते समय बार बार उन कोट्स को रेफर कीजिए. इससे क्या होगा कि आपके माइंड में एग्जामिनेशन में क्वेश्चन आंसर लिखते समय, क्वेश्चन अटेम्प्ट करते समय वो कोट्स आपके ध्यान में आ जाएंगे जिसको आप वहां मेंशन कर सकते हैं. देन सारा गेम यही है कि इंडियन पॉलिटिकल थॉट के क्वेश्चन में कि क्या कोट आपको याद रहेगा. नाउ नेशनल कमीशन फॉर माइनॉरिटीज, नो नीड टू डिस्कस हियर, फेयरली डायरेक्ट आपको सारी जगहों पे इसका आंसर मिल जाएगा. कहीं पर भी ये सीधे सीधे सिलेबस के हेडिंग से क्वेश्चन पूछा है. नेशनल कमीशन ऑन माइनॉरिटीज. देन discuss major provisions of 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. Do you think that the act remains an unfulfilled dream? First part of the question, there is no need to discuss. It's a factual information about 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. It was passed in 1992. The purpose was to ensure local self-government in India, and the purpose was to give powers into the hands of people, and so that people will start participating in their own administration. अब यहाँ पर you can briefly mention about, अगर आपको याद है तो, वो योगिंदर वाई के अलग का व्यू पॉइंट about 74th Constitutional Amendment Act that has the potential to transform urban local government, और उसके बाद उसके अलग अलग पार्ट्स के बारे में आप यहाँ पर मेंशन कर सकते हैं. लेकिन सेकेंड पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन नीड्स अ बिट ऑफ एनालिसिस, दैट डू यू थिंक दैट द एक्ट रिमेन्स एन अनफुलफिल्ड ड्रीम, आर्ग्यू योर केस. अब इस क्वेश्चन का आंसर विद इन स्टिपुलेटेड टाइम पीरियड में लिखना थोड़ा चैलेंजिंग है. क्यों 74th Constitutional Amendment Act has not been able to empower urban local bodies? ये इस बार के जीएस का भी क्वेश्चन था. बिकॉज functionally they are facing challenges and financially also they are facing a lot of challenges. Because of those functional and financial challenges, an attitude of a state government and bureaucracy, that 74th Constitutional Amendment Act has not been able to empower urban local bodies per se. You can mention about various decentralization powers and functions. The act devolved wide range of powers and functions to urban local bodies. Inadequate financial resources for municipalities, उनके पास financial resources नहीं है. Lack of cooperation from state government, and many municipalities have failed to comply with the solid waste management rules 2016. And then weak institutional capacity. Many municipalities, they lack the institutional capacity to implement their powers and functions effectively. So they are both functionally and financially dependent upon a state government. Attitude of bureaucracy is also of contempt towards urban local bodies, in fact towards local self-government itself. So both the state government and bureaucracy are not very cooperative, and that is why 74th Constitutional Amendment Act has not been able to realize its full potential. That is how you will conclude the question. दैट स्टेट, और यहां पर आप वे फॉरवर्डिंग एक कंक्लूजन में आंसर सजेशन के साथ आप कंक्लूजन लिखेंगे कि 74th Amendment Act has made significant progress. There is more work to be done. State government needs to be very cooperative, more cooperative. Bureaucracy needs to be cooperative. Municipalities also need to strengthen financially, institutionally. However, 74th Constitutional Amendment Act has laid a strong foundation for local self-government in India. Then, next question is that how does Niti Aayog act as a policy think tank with shared vision to visualize the reorganization of planning in India, and justify your answer. Now, you briefly mentioned about Niti Aayog, again a very factual question, that Dr. Amitav Kundu argues that Niti Aayog, अब यहाँ पर आप scholars को quote करेंगे, same question can be asked in general studies, but here your approach will be different. You will directly quote scholars and report if you remember. So, Dr. Amitav Kundu argues that Niti Aayog is a significant departure from the traditional planning process in India, and he emphasizes the role of Niti Aayog as a policy think tank that is focused on developing long-term strategies and solutions to India's developmental challenges. Now, body part of the question, that is explain in detail key features of Niti Aayog vision for reorganization of planning in India. And in part 2, Niti Aayog is working to realize its vision for the reorganization of planning in India through a number of initiatives. So, part 1, some key features of Niti Aayog vision for reorganization. Bottom up planning का approach है इनका, that planning should be driven from bottom up. जो हमारा top down approach था that miserably failed of planning commission, so it's a bottom up approach. Collaborative planning, and it focuses upon inclusive planning. And part 2 of the question, Niti Aayog is working to realize its vision for the reorganization of planning in India through a number of initiatives. And then you will mention about those initiatives like aspirational district program. Aspirational district program एक program है जिसमें उन areas पर special focus किया जाएगा, उन districts पर that are low on key social indicators. Then the Sustainable Development Goals of India Index is a statistical tool that tracks India's progress towards 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It is being developed by Niti Aayog, the National Development Council, and then Niti Aayog has proposed a number of reforms to the planning process in India, including a shift to a strategic planning. Niti Aayog has proposed a shift from traditional planning to a strategic planning. Focus on outcome. Traditionally, the focus has been on output in India. Now Niti Aayog is focusing upon outcome aspect. Outcome means intended consequences of a program. That is, for example, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. Traditionally, how India looked at those programs, कि क्या उस प्रोग्राम में जितना पैसा खर्च करना था उतना ही खर्च हुआ है. आउटपुट, अभी आउटकम पर फोकस है. जो उसका ऑब्जेक्टिव था, क्या वो ऑब्जेक्टिव फुलफिल हुआ है? If yes, then well and good. And then a more flexible approach will be adopted by Niti Aayog to fulfill developmental objectives. And then third part of the question, benefits of Niti Aayog's vision for the reorganization of planning in India. Improved plan, better coordination and more inclusive development. And then you will briefly conclude. अगर आपको रिपोर्ट याद है तो बहुत अच्छी बात है. इला पटनायक का रिपोर्ट, that Niti Aayog is still a work in progress. She identifies a number of challenges that Niti Aayog faces, including limited capacity and lack of political autonomy, financial constraints. So this approach is justified by its potential to enhance the effectiveness, efficiency and inclusivity of India's developmental planning processes. ये क्वेश्चन इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स के क्वेश्चन में एक ही चीज ट्रिकी होती है कि क्या आपको वहां पर रिपोर्ट्स याद रहेगा या आपको स्कॉलर्स का कोट याद रहेगा. क्योंकि अगर आपने इंडियन पॉलिटी की तरह से आंसर लिख दिया इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड पॉलिटिक्स में, सो देयर इज एवरी चांस दैट यू विल नॉट गेट मार्क्स. सो नेक्स्ट वन इज दैट द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया इज द कॉर्नरस्टोन ऑफ द नेशन. नाउ दिस इज epochal statement made by Greenwald Austin. It is the cornerstone of the nation. उनकी बुक का नाम भी यही है. So you will briefly mention about the significance of this statement. That this statement, it underscored the profound significance and central role of Indian Constitution in shaping nation's identity, governance and democratic principles. In fact, Greenwell Austin, in his cornerstone of the nation, writes that simultaneously India was trying to achieve three revolutions, namely social revolution, economic revolution, and political revolution. And he says that India was able to achieve political revolution with India's independence. India will achieve economic revolution with adoption of modern economy, but social revolution is a work in progress. So, and then you will discuss about in body part that how Constitution of India can be considered as a cornerstone of a nation. It is a foundational document. ये सब आपने पढ़ा होगा Indian polity में भी और सारी जगहों पे. It is a foundational document. Democratic values. Then it promotes unity in diversity, secularism, social justice, and amendment process, as well as the provision of judicial review. And at the end, you will conclude by acknowledging the central role the Constitution of India plays in shaping the nation. You can mention the viewpoint of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar that Constitution is not merely a lawyer's document. It is a vehicle of life and its spirit is always the spirit of age. कोई और quote भी लिख सकते हैं यहाँ पर. Again, a direct question, a bit analytical question, लेकिन a famous statement. Now, seventh question, does the actual working of Indian federalism, it confirms the centralizing tendencies in Indian polity? Give reason to your answer. So, you will find both unitary and federal features under the Indian Constitution. That is why Indian Constitution is called as a federation sui generis. The Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar's words that Constitution can be both unitary and federal according to the requirements of the time and circumstances. Now the question is, does the actual working of Indian federalism confirm the centralizing tendencies in Indian polity? Now you need to elaborate upon federal features that conform to the centralizing tendencies and also mention about decentralizing features. That is, for example, centralizing tendencies, a strong center. So, for example, under Schedule 7 of Indian Constitution, three lists have been provided. Union list, state list and concurrent list. Union has got complete jurisdiction over subjects provided under Union list. On the subjects provided under a state list, under 5 extraordinary circumstances, the parliament can legislate. In case of concurrent list, both state and parliament can legislate, but parliament will have prior and superior claim of legislation. Then emergency power that has been provided under the Constitution of India, under Article 352, under Article 356 and under Article 360. Then appointment of governor. और भी बहुत सारी चीजें हैं, जैसे ऑल इंडिया सिटीजनशिप, प्रेजेंस ऑफ आर्टिकल 3, प्रेजेंस ऑफ ऑल इंडिया सर्विसेज, सब, देयर इज नो प्रोविजन ऑफ ड्यूअल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन अंडर इंडिया, ये सब सेंट्रलाइजिंग टेंडेंसीज हैं. And that gives autonomy to a state. States have also been given autonomy. Then finance, provisions of finance commission and federal institutions like Niti Aayog and GST Council. And then you will briefly conclude that how both features are balanced under the Constitution. And you can mention about the viewpoint, if you remember, about Rickard, that the strength of any federal system depends not so much on the constitutional structure, but rather on the political and economic culture that may be prevailing within the country at any given point of time. Now, the main goal of the fundamental duties in the Indian Constitution is to generate civic responsibility among the citizens. Now, Part 4A of Indian Constitution, which was added through 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, in the words of Subhas Kashyap, that Part 4A of Indian Constitution is nothing but a codification of Indian way of life. यही sum up करता है इस पूरे question को. It is nothing but a codification of Indian way of life. That Indian way of life has been codified through the list of fundamental duties. So, is to generate civic responsibility among the citizen, that is, those responsibilities which makes you a complete member of civil society. Body part में elaborate how it generates civic responsibilities. So by वही जो 10 fundamental rights हैं वहीं पर पूरा आंसर है. Fundamental duties जो हैं, जो NCERT के कवर पेज के बाद लिखा होता है वहीं पर सारा आंसर है. Promoting social harmony, relatively a very easy question. Then strengthening democracy, protecting public resources, then promoting education, enhancing personal responsibilities, and then provide a brief conclusion. A man can give up a right, but he may not give up a duty without being guilty of grave dereliction. महात्मा गांधी. ये स्टेटमेंट से भी आप यहाँ पर स्टार्ट कर सकते हैं और इस क्वेश्चन के आंसर को आप फिनिश कर सकते हैं. नाउ Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar's clarion call of educate, agitate and organize strategizes the Dalit movement towards achieving civil liberty. So, give a brief description of Ambedkar's ideas on Dalit movement. Primarily a liberal thinker who preferred constitutional means for redressal of grievances. और इसीलिए उन्होंने कहा कि educate, agitate and organize. Ambedkar was moved by inhuman treatment of his community. और बॉडी में आप लिखेंगे elaborate on how Dr. Ambedkar sought to unite Dalits. Solidarity among Dalits was one of the reasons. Then protest, urged the members of Dalit community to protest against repression. Political mobilization and critical analysis of Hindu society was provided by him. Empowerment and literary works like annihilation of caste. तो क्वेश्चन कहता है डिस्कस कि इसने सिविल लिबर्टी को इंश्योर करने में कैसे हेल्प किया, एंड देन प्रोवाइड अ कंक्लूजन with views on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, that he has often been portrayed as a leader who upheld the partisan cause of the untouchables, due to which Arun Shourie in his book Worshipping False Gods has called Ambedkar anti-national. Shourie argues that Ambedkar emerged as the leader of the community rather than leader of the nation. But such partisanship was grounded on a body of thought. ये जेफ्रिलेट का क्रिस्टोफर जेफ्रिलेट ने कहा कि it was grounded on the body of thought and ideas built on defensible arguments which he very ably and effectively deployed. इस argument से इस question को sum up कर देंगे. And then finally, question number 8. The rise of caste politics to be attributed to both regional aspirations and electoral manifestations. Comment. Now there are 4 parts in this question. 2-part regional aspiration and electoral manifestation. Introduction and conclusion. So we briefly mention about the potential of caste in shaping political landscape of India. Caste politics India में result किस चीज का रहा है? India में result रहा है interplay between region, specific aspiration, electoral calculations, and it has been the result of India's competitive electoral politics. कि जहां हर कोई कास्ट अरिथमेटिक के हिसाब से अपने इलेक्टोरल फॉर्च्यून को देखने की कोशिश करता है. तो इस क्वेश्चन में ये मेंशन किया जा सकता है that caste based politics in India is the result of interplay of these factors and electoral calculations. Now mention how the rise of caste politics in India can be attributed to regional aspiration and electoral manifestations. इसमें किसी एक पार्ट को तुम फ्लो चार्ट के थ्रू भी अगर चाहो तो दिखा सकते हो, अगर टाइम कम है तो. पहला कास्ट डेमोग्राफीज. सर्टेन कास्ट कहीं पर ज्यादा डोमिनेंट है किसी एरियाज में. हिस्टोरिकल इनजस्टिसेस, सोशियो इकोनॉमिक डिस्पेरिटीज has also given rise to unique caste related issues. Vote bank politics because of India's competitive electoral politics. Reservation system. And then you will conclude by highlighting the impact of caste on political institution. You will mention the viewpoint of Rajni Kothari on caste as a political institution. He emphasized that caste is not merely a social or cultural institution, but also a potent political force in India. And that is how. And he argued that caste plays a crucial role in shaping political behavior, voting pattern and dynamics of political parties. And this caste related question, it has been asked I don't know how many times. In the last 10 years, you will find not less than 7-8 times. A question related to this particular topic has been asked. And this particular topic is also a paraphrased version of the question asked in another year. So next, the decade 1989 to 1999 has created an epochal shift in Indian party system at the national level. Identify the major national trends in the party system during that era. अब ये क्वेश्चन ऐसा है कि नॉर्मली आप नहीं पढ़ेंगे क्योंकि अभी कोलिशन पॉलिटिक्स का तो फेज चल नहीं रहा है, But 1989 till 1999, India was completely dominated by coalition politics. Starting from Vishwanath Pratap Singh's government, वहां से लेकर और 1999 अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी की गवर्नमेंट जब पार्लियामेंट में एक वोट से गिरी थी, वहां तक आप पूरा एग्जाम्पल ये कोलिशन पॉलिटिक्स का है. सो यहां पर यू विल मेंशन अबाउट द डेकेड ऑफ 1989 to 99 assured a new era of coalition politics. The rise of regional parties and changing fortune of established national parties that shaped Indian polity to a great extent. Question पूछा है, identify major national trend in the party system during that era. तो जो पहला national trend था वो था coalition politics. That this period witnessed the decline of single party dominance and coalition of a number of parties, they started ruling. Second part आप बोल सकते हैं that end of single party dominance. Indian National Congress, it dominated Indian political scene for decades, but now that completely ended. And regional parties, they started dominating decision making process at central level. Then third point you can mention here, rise of regional parties like Rashtriya Janata Dal, Telugu Desam Party, Dravid Munner Kargam, then All India Dravid Munner Kargam, ADMK, Anna Dravid Munner Kargam, All India Anna Dravid Munner Kargam. Then fluctuating electoral alliances, impact of Mandal Commission on caste politics, and economic liberalization and political reorientation when parties began adopting pro-market economic policies, including some traditionally socialist parties embracing economic reforms. And then you will mention that it led to frequent elections in India. You can mention about Vishwanath Pratap Singh's government, Chandrasekhar's government. Then again in 1996, Janata Party's government when SD Devegowda and I.K. Gujral became Prime Minister. Then Atal Bihari's 13-day government. Then Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government that fell by a margin of 1 vote in 1999. So it led to political instability and frequent elections in the country that put tremendous amount of pressure on the fragile economic conditions of India. And then you will conclude by highlighting the dominant features of coalition politics, that coalition politics and coalition governments are related to ongoing processes of transformation. You will also mention that coalition politics, it also led to slow decision making process in the country. क्योंकि वहाँ those parties were not having all India outlook. They were more concerned about the well-being of their own fortune in their states. So they are concerned, they were not having all India outlook. So that further posed difficulty at policy making level. And then another question is, do you agree that over the years the Supreme Court has become a forum for policy evolution? Yes, forum for policy evolution. Why? Because I have mentioned here that you can mention the importance of Supreme Court, you can highlight the importance of Article 32 that has been given huge importance by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. You can also mention about how incorporation of public interest litigation under the jurisprudence of India has completely transformed not only Indian judiciary, but it also expanded the scope of Article 21. So Supreme Court has become a forum for policy evolution. Now, the policies that are being made by policy makers, it's more people centric. तो यहाँ पर आप mention कर सकते हैं that elaborate on the points that justify the importance of Supreme Court in becoming a forum for policy evolution. You can mention about public interest litigation and its crucial role in shaping, in expanding the scope of Article 21 and giving rights to people. Constitutional interpretation provided by Supreme Court that has also had far-reaching implications for policy formulation and execution. Then fundamental rights protection that was provided by Supreme Court, and you can mention about various cases like Putta Swamy case, Shreya Singhal case, Joseph Shine case. इसमें एक और पॉइंट ये आप यूज कर सकते हैं that it has expanded greatly the scope of Article 21 because and Supreme Court has truly lived up to its dictum that a constitution does not speak by itself, a constitution speaks through judiciary. It has enormously expanded the scope of Article 21 in ensuring a dignified life to people. Environmental and social concerns have also been taken up by the courts in a number of cases. Leading to prudent policy making at top level. And then the provision of judicial review and social transformation. And you will conclude by mentioning landmark judgment like Keshman and Bharti case in the evolution of the Keshman and Bharti case and Menaka Gandhi case. And that is how you will wind up this question. So that's about paper 1. So I have tried to cover all the questions. The point is that none of the questions were very difficult. But the point was that almost in every question you find certain pattern, and those patterns are that questions are not very difficult, but in order to write those questions you need to have certain understanding of the subject. If you have gone through the syllabus a couple of times, if you know about the quotes and the books, मैंने स्कॉलर्स को काफ़ी कोट किया है यहाँ पर अपने आंसर्स में. एग्जाम में आपको लिमिटेड स्पेस में उन स्कॉलर्स को कोट करना आपके लिए थोड़ा चैलेंजिंग हो जाएगा. लेकिन अगर आप मेरे से पूछेंगे डिफिकल्टी लेवल, so difficulty was, I would say, I will not call it a very difficult paper, it is a generic paper. जो सिलेबस के हर टॉपिक को करने के बाद आप बहुत आराम से पेपर अटेम्प्ट कर सकते थे. एक यूनिक बात मैंने ये देखी कि सिलेबस के हर टॉपिक को टच करने की उनकी कोशिश रही है. So next time around when you will appear for your paper, so try to cover all the topics given under the syllabus. So that's about paper 1. Discussion of paper 1, and soon we will discuss paper 2 also. Thank you.